historical shortcomings of the Polish nation have long been obvious. The mistrustfulness, patrician splendour and peasant shabbiness, xenophobia and impulsiveness, the fumbled victories, like a madman being led by the hand of an angel, as the German author Müller put it. A man who favours the rational, pragmatic and imperial temperament of the conqueror will find little to satisfy him in Polish history. But the rhapsodic temperament, the lover of charm and hospitality, the brave and reckless in life, the imaginative observer, the advocate of freedom will surely be satisfied. The lover of horses and horsemen, the patriot who treasures honour and fidelity above all, the romantic who favours the heroic gesture over the consequences of it, the burning emotion over the achievement, sincerity of intention over regularity of thought. Such as these will mine a rich seam in Poland.
I'm in a leafy northwest Warsaw suburb to meet author Michael Moran. A man of many talents, Michael published A Country in the Moon in 2008. It details his journey to Poland in 1992 and captures the dramatic sudden change of communism's collapse and capitalism's triumph. But there's much more to Michael than one book, as you'll shortly discover. Michael, thank you very much for agreeing to take us on a walk around the beautiful area where you live.
It's a very wonderful area.
Where are we going to go today?
We're going to go through this gate to the embankment, the Val embankment, and walk along there and perhaps down to the Vistula and perhaps a round trip, basically, because we're on the edge of an ecological park here,
yes.
Actually.
And you've been living here since 2000?
About 2000, well, I bought the flat in 2004. I didn't come to live here, it's probably 5, roughly that.
But of course your experience of Poland begins much, much earlier.
Well, I was working here. It was a joint venture. I was working in 1992, and then I did 3 contracts of 9 months each.
So can you explain to us how it is that an Australian ended up in Poland, which was a country I think you admit in your book that you knew relatively little about?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I mean, Australians don't know very much about Poland. But I'd been living in London for a long time. And it was oddly my mother who said to me one evening, "Michael, you're in a rut, you must do something more interesting." And then a couple of weeks later this job came up in Poland, and I mentioned it, and she said, "There you are, the land of Chopin, go to it."
And this is of course your fascination with Poland is very much about Chopin and,
yes.
and your uncle Eddie,
yes.
his musical connections. Who was Edward Cahill?
He was my great uncle, and he was a very well-known concert pianist in Australia and then later in London in the 1920s and 30s and on the French Riviera. It was an extremely glamorous period, and he lived a life that a pianist could only dream of today.
And so you knew him? He told you about these years?
Yes, and he was so fond of Chopin himself. He was a sort of Chopin specialist. And when he died, he asked me to take his ashes to Żelazowa Wola, where Chopin was born, and spread them. I didn't manage to do this because he died in Monaco.
When you listen to Chopin, what kind of emotions does he evoke in you now and then, actually? I mean, did you have a strong connection between Chopin and Poland?
There's one word I think describes Polish temperament very well, and it's the word resistance. It explains so many things here, just the word resistance. And in Chopin's music, you're seduced at the beginning of so many works, and then there is this powerful, it's in Polish called żal. It's this sort of melancholy but tinged with anger and resentment. And this infuses all of his work. And it's very much part of my own temperament, I think.
So there's a romantic in you?
Yes, but there's also an Australian, which is fairly basic and angry.
Let's go back then to 1992 and your first sojourn in Poland. What did it look like?
Well, I'll tell you what struck me first was the absence of illumination, because we came to Warsaw on the project and I couldn't see anything. Everything was sort of like in buses, the light was very, very dim, and also there was no advertising, of course.
Yes.
So that was the main thing I felt. Everything was so dark, and also I couldn't recognise what was in shops, because there was never a big sign out saying this is a cake shop or whatever. And sometimes I would have to go in to explore to find out exactly what the shop was.
And of course you didn't speak Polish, because this was, just got there, so it must have been such a difficult experience just to do
Well, I'll tell you the first thing, our Polish teacher, because we had a Polish teacher, and the first words is, very important, what you must learn, the first words in Polish, nie ma. I said, I see. And this was at the beginning in the 90s, because the nie ma there was nothing.
Yeah.
You could go to Pevex shops to get things, but a lot of shops were very short on stock.
So, I mean, the logical person would say, why on earth would you want to go to Poland? I mean, the life was so difficult, basic things weren't around. Was there something in your character that wanted that hardship?
Yeah, adventure. I mean, you must remember, Australians are adventurous, and the previous book I had written was about Papua New Guinea. And the great Polish ethnologist, Bronisław Malinowski, who for me is one of the great neglected intellectuals of the 20th century, he had been interned during the First World War on the Trobriand Islands. And I had read his book called The Sexual Life of Savages.
Which is...
It's a title you couldn't use today.
Indeed, yes.
And it was so beautifully written, and the description of the island so magnificent, I decided to go to New Guinea. That and the fact that all Australian boys wanted to be Errol Flynn. Because Errol Flynn made his first film roles in New Guinea wrestling crocodiles, I believe. Anyway, Malinowski, and particularly Malinowski's relationship with Witkatzy, which is an extraordinary friendship they had, because they were both in Zakopane, and I think both their mothers had guest houses there. Anyway, Malinowski and Witkatzy went to Australia together on a ship, and this friendship was so amusing and so adventurous, I became interested in Poland, and I thought, where did these people come from? It sounds so interesting. So that was another motivation to go.
You've got Uncle Eddie,
the pianist.
Then you've got Papua New Guinea and the sexual life of Malinowski.
And Malinowski. And that was the two main reasons I came to Poland.
Now, you were there in '92, and it was obviously not just food supplies that were in short supply. You also had sort of basic business management skills that were lacking, and people were trying to adjust to this new capitalist economy that was being thrust upon them. That was a huge amount of change for people.
Yes.
How were you treated in those days?
Royally. Treated royally. The idea of expenses didn't really interest them. I was amazed. We were offered breaks in England, wonderful accommodation, everything, although where we worked was a former ośrodek.
Yes.
In Polish it was called Samopomoc Słopska, which is a sort of agricultural place, which were popular in the communist days for conferences and things like that.
Yes. So you were out in the sticks, literally living with
I should really say Polish socialist days. Really.
Yes.
But anyway, yes.
That's something we might come on to later. So you're isolated out there, and you're going through the experience of surviving a Polish winter.
Yes, well that was terrible. I mean, a lot of snow then. Now, hardly any snow in comparison in Warsaw. Warsaw had metres of snow in those days.
And in your book you describe how you quickly adjusted to the local custom of having a wee shot of vodka in the morning to rev the engine.
Yes, I did, but also to take away the depression. I mean, this was an ośrodek that was very, very basic. And all the windows leaked, and there were many, many peculiar things for me. For example, in order to, you lock a door to the right normally. Well, because the locks had worn out, so that you had to lock it to the left, and I could never remember which door had this or that. Light switches were reversed. I mean, everything seemed completely different.
This is a strong theme from your book, which is around this kind of almost the absurdity of the socialist system, and it's these dregs of that system that remain, from the light switches to the business mentality, let's say.
And also the moral erosion, I think, that took place in the country because of this influence of communism and thinking. That way of what you might call thinking through suspicion and mendacity and always looking for an edge, you know. It really worried me at the time, because we were trying to run a project that had examinations associated with it, and you had to have certain, you know, standards of examination. So that was always very difficult to persuade people to think differently. And I'm not entirely convinced, you know, that this is a sort of virus that's in the system. I'm not entirely convinced it's gone even today.
Yeah, I mean, that was my question really, which is, I mean, we're talking about events 30 years ago almost, and how much of that Poland that you remember from those days is still here?
Yes. Well, the mindset in many cases still is, but of course young people are completely different. But they will have to wait until that group, I suppose, pass away. But, you know, I just think it's just like an infection you can't get rid of, you know.
Yes, yes. Now, your book, A Country in the Moon, it was very helpful to me when I first came to Poland. Why did you decide to write that book? What was the genesis of that?
My diaries, because at night I had nothing to do in the Ośrodek, although it was full of young girls because they were banking staff, and it was great fun dancing in the kawiarnia and drinking vodka, but you know, they were all married because early marriage was very popular in Poland 30 years ago. And we had great fun, but often at night I would just write my diary, which was an exact description of the day. And I had, I don't know, 6 or 8 volumes of diaries. No one was interested in a book on Poland. They said, not exotic enough. And I said, you don't know Poland very well. You don't know the history. It's very exotic. So that was one of the obstacles. It took me many years to interest a serious publisher in a book on Poland.
So you were going to people and you already had the concept of the book you wanted to write?
Yes. Yes, I had the concept and I had the material. What I wanted to do was describe my experience as a foreigner during this period of transition. This was a very important period in Polish history, as you know, after 1989. And nobody really knew how to behave in society. They were free suddenly. And incredible things kept happening. I mean, it was like living in Monty Python or Salvador Dali painting, you know. It was the most entertaining period. I loved it.
You described meeting all sorts of colourful characters and colourful business proposals, like a car wash, which we can't go into too much detail, but it involved very scantily clad car cleaners.
Well, there were lots of experiments and a lot of imitation of entertaining aspects of Western life, yes.
So talk us through the writing of the book. How long did it take you, and how did it change you?
Well, it took some years to write, and the reason for that was I was not deeply familiar with Polish history. That was it. And I have a rather romantic view of the UAN, who are the Polish cavalry, because I'd read a lot about Napoleon's personal guard, the Chevaux Légers, as they were known. And it just, because I'd done some horse riding in England, I felt rather romantic about the whole aspect of them, particularly the winged cavalry.
Yes.
It really got me into the history. Then I started reading, of course, about the Teutonic Knights. What an extraordinary group of armed religious fanatics they were. I mean,
yes.
and very, very good at business. But I think that particularly the Teutonic Knights fascinated me, absolutely fascinated.
So we're talking about the Malbork Castle and
Malbork, yes.
which is now in Poland, but
That's
of course
right.
at that stage was...
The other thing is I was very interested in aircraft, which I still am, and the whole Hurricane and Spitfire squadrons and bomber command of Squadron 303, for example, the Kosciuszko squadron, fascinated me. so excited by the story of their ability to shoot down enemy aircraft.
So Michael, what did you put in the book? What were you trying to focus on in particular?
Oh, well, when you're writing a book, I wanted to keep people, it's called infotainment. In other words, information and entertainment combined. That's what I wanted. And of course the project was so entertaining and the history was formidably profound. And I think, you know, I'd never read such a tragic history.
Yes.
Never in my life.
Now, the Poland you describe in the book, you're driving around in this tremendously beautiful car.
Yes.
It's a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow.
Well, it was the only car I had actually, but anyway.
So you were looking at, you know, it couldn't be any more uniquely British, this piece of manufacture. What was people's reaction?
Very incredibly positive. They used to say things like, "Thank you for bringing this car to Poland. It shows such respect for our country. We are so grateful that you did this." Such a thing could never be said today, of course.
So here we are, Michael. This is Roland.
Yes.
When did you buy him?
In 1985.
And that was obviously before you'd come to Poland. So where did you keep
Oh,
it?
yes, I kept it in London when I lived in London.
Living in London.
Yeah, I lived in central London. It was the most expensive aspect of owning the car, was parking it.
Now, bringing it to Poland, as you write in your book, was quite a risky move in those days.
In those days, yes, because there was a lot of Russian mafia here then, and there was an enormous amount of car hijacking. You remember that joke? There was a joke about this, don't bring your car to Poland, it's already there.
I think that was German.
German, yes,
at
yes,
the time.
yes.
And people were telling you that sort of armed men would come out with Kalashnikovs.
Well, they were
pouncing at-
hijacking cars. It was very, and this would have just disappeared into a truck and been across the border overnight. That used to happen with Mercedes and BMWs quite a lot.
And you did have a car break-in, but they didn't take the car.
Not this car.
Not this car.
No, it was the Duja Fiat
Ah.
that I bought. That was the company car. Wonderful car.
No. Although they took your stuff rather than the car itself. So.
Yeah, that's true. And they left me a pair of boots.
Now, what did you do with this car? Where did you take it? I'm assuming that everywhere you went, people had their jaws open at the time. 'Cause
Well,
it was such a
I
rare
didn't
sight.
bring it as my daily driver. What I brought it as was a car for doing a particular rally. It was the first rally around Poland, I think since about 1916, international rally in 1993. And I thought, well, this would be an exciting thing to do. So I registered it, and it was. It's a good car for this type of. It's a robust car, and it was an interesting one because no one had brought a Rolls-Royce to Poland.
Now we're coming up to the river which more than anything else dominates Poland, a crucial part in Polish history. You describe
Absolutely.
this in the book. How do you feel about the Vistula River?
Well, the Vistula, I mean, you know, it flows right through the centre of Warsaw, and the potential for a beach. There are beaches in Warsaw right on the doorstep of the city. But the Vistula goes through its phases. I mean, I followed the Vistula from the source of the Vistula, which is two tiny little streams in the Beskid. No, in the Beskid.
Yeah.
And I followed it until it began to grow as a river. And of course, by the time it's reached here, it's quite a significant width. But it starts off as two tiny little. It's called the Black and the White Stream, if I remember.
What kind of feelings does the Vistula evoke in you?
Well, very rural. I mean, that sounds a bit, but the point is, if you look at it, you can see beach. Sand is a very significant part of the Warsaw substrate, and when you're building buildings, it's a big problem because of subsidence.
You've come down to this river throughout your life here in Poland.
Yes.
Over these decades now.
It's improved enormously.
This was not here.
This wasn't here,
It was concrete.
and not only that, the smell isn't here now, because untreated sewage used to go into the river, and it was very, very unpleasant. Not only that, you were advised not to even put your toe in the water, This has changed completely. There are now fish swimming up almost to the centre of town. Yes, it's completely changed.
Will we see a sequel to your book, Michael?
Well, that's a very difficult question because so much has changed and so much has become Europeanised, I think. I mean, I'm not sure what I would write about now apart from personality traits, which have remained the same. I don't think national characteristics change very much, actually. I don't think they do. But I think that the Polish sense of entrepreneurship, improvisation, invention is still very, very strong here. And I think, oddly enough, their way of doing business is particularly modern.
Yes, they're entrepreneurial.
We're not in the days of the handshake, you know.
Or the car wash with the scantily-clad ladies.
No.
Michael, thank you very much
Okay.
for writing the book and for making Poland no longer a country in the moon, but
All right.
a country many people know and love.
Fine.
It's been a personal pleasure meeting you.
Yes, well, I've enjoyed talking about it. I
Thank you.
probably could talk for ages about it, yes. Nice view, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. At the end of Michael's book, he's forced to leave Poland when the project he's working on finishes. He records the painful moment in his diary, and it's with his own moving words that we finish this particularly special episode. Thank you for watching, and please share this film onwards.
An extract from my diary, Bath, 13th of November 1992. The day I was finally to leave Poland dawned. Emotions in upheaval. The weather was sunny, clear and cold, with the achingly blue sky of the north. It must be admitted that hovering over this loss is the bird of freedom and relief. It is over. Disappointing that the Polish staff expressed no regrets. After all, it was a joint project. They were told our costs had ruined it. They have too many jobs to have any loyalty to any one, I suppose. A hollow in my heart even so. I had read somewhere that Poles lend themselves to you. Even Lech Wałęsa once said they rarely express gratitude. My great leaders thought me too emotionally involved with the country, so no sympathy there either. Probably glad the plug had been pulled. I stood in the empty room with half a bottle of warm mineral water, looking at the empty shelves. I kept thinking of the beautifully unresolved Chekhov story, The Lady with the Little Dog. Gurov, in despair over the sordid secrecy of their impossible love, wonders, with his head in his hands, how they can be together always. And it seemed as though in a little while a solution would be found, and then a new and glorious life would begin. And it was clear to both of them that the end was still far off, and that what was to be most complicated and difficult for them was only just beginning.